Well, welcome everybody. Good evening, and thanks for showing up tonight. I know there were some other things you can do, but this kind of turnout just demonstrates how important it is for this community to be involved in a process as important as helping to choose the next superintendent of the Edmonds School District. My name's Rob McGregor, and I'm an associate with GR Recruiting, the firm that the Edmonds School Board of Directors hired to assist them in this important process of choosing the next superintendent. Before we hear from our first candidate, I want to kind of go through how things will work tonight. So, first, the process works like this. The candidate will introduce herself and share a little information about her background and experiences that lead to her qualifications for the position of Edmonds Superintendent. During that time, you may write questions that you have on those index cards. We have folks here, and I'm going to ask them to wave their hands and identify themselves, that are going to go around and collect the cards. Will you raise your hands, wave? Okay, people, okay, so here's the deal. If you write a question and you want me to see it and possibly ask it of our candidates, you need to somehow get it to one of those folks by raising your hand or passing it down to somebody at the end of the row so that they can collect the cards. If you're writing in one of the languages that we are providing interpreters for, try to get a card to the interpreter, and I'll be on the lookout for those questions as well. Now, about the questions. I don't like to read a whole lot of text on those cards, so make your questions concise and to the point. Also, if I deem one question's already been asked or it's pretty doggone similar, I will probably skip that question or maybe merge it with another one. Also, just know, I will not probably be able to get to all the questions, and I certainly will not ask questions that are not relevant to the search process for the new superintendent. So asking somebody's favorite breakfast cereal isn't going to cut it, or something else that just isn't along the lines of the search process. So at the end of the time, I will stand up and let the superintendent candidate know that the time is drawing to an end, and we need to close this thing. And then they'll leave, and you'll have a chance to fill out those impression sheets that you also received at the door. Your feedback is important, and the school board will be reading every one of those hundreds of impression sheets that are coming in from various groups that have heard throughout today a forum. They've heard a presentation by one of the candidates. So, after that time, the 10-minute break goes by, we will bring in candidate 2, and we'll do it all over again. So, without any further ado, I will introduce our first candidate. So, Dr. Rebecca Miner is the current interim superintendent, of course, for the Edmonds School District. Prior to that, she served 7 years as the superintendent for the Shoreline School District, and before that, 3 years with the White Pass School District. She earned her doctorate from the Washington State University, and it's a pleasure for me to turn it over now to Dr. Miner.
Thank you so much, Rob. Well, it's so exciting to see everybody here tonight and just to have a little bit of an opportunity to share about myself and also to hear your questions tonight. I want to start with just talking about myself as a little girl, and I was definitely, probably like many of you, the person, if you're teachers, the person who played school during the summertime in her garage. And if for some reason I could not convince the neighborhood pals that that was a fun thing to do, my stuffed animals were definitely willing to stand in. I always loved school, and I always loved what it did for me. My greatest growth as an educator happened, though, when I was a teacher, and I realized that not everyone was having the same experiences that I did with school. So when you're a first-year language arts teacher and you realize they're not going to love a poem just because it's literature, that was like, oh, I've got something, I need to do something about this. I also had a wide variety of students in my classroom, and after I was already a certified teacher in teaching, I went back and got my special education credential because I felt like I didn't know how to serve all of the children in my classroom, and frankly, I was serving in a system that I didn't think gave me enough resources to do that. It changed me as I grew through my career because I realized it's the obligation of a system to support teachers and paraeducators and administrators in being able to do that, and not all on me to go figure out how to best serve my students in the classroom, how to remove barriers for them, and how to make sure that they were getting an equitable education in my classroom, and later as a school and district leader in the schools. So, would you want me to continue while questions begin to be gathered? I'll talk a little bit more. I've taught English, special education. As I said, once I got my special education credential, I was very proud to serve in a special education classroom. Then I was a building administrator, both at the middle school and high school level, assistant principal, before I became a central office administrator. Other than my time in the classroom learning about how to support students who maybe didn't share the same views as I did or have the same experiences that I did in school, my greatest growth came when I became the superintendent of a district of 400 students. Being a superintendent of a district with 400 students teaches you the system from A to Z. I completed every grant in that system. I wasn't an expert in anything, but I knew enough about the Title I grant, the MLL grant. Well, we did not have MLL students in that district. The highly capable grant, all of those grants, because I had to complete them all and I had to assure compliance with all of them. So it gave me the opportunity to deeply engage and learn in that work. Then I did serve in Shoreline for 7 years, where I had this remarkable opportunity to be a superintendent in one district for a long time, to see the growth that could occur when we had coherence and support for each other in our district. And we saw great gains in our student achievement and in our opportunity to have students achieve equitable outcomes. And finally, last year, I set out to take a year off. In the superintendency, there aren't really opportunities to take sabbaticals. So if you want to take a break, you really need to leave one position. So I left my position to work for, to take a break, and I ended up working for WASA, the Washington Association of School Administrators, on their Inclusionary Practices project, which is designed to help students achieve more time in general education and the least restrictive environments possible, and most importantly, to support districts and staffs and teachers as they strive to achieve that work. But I only held out 8 months of my year because I do love being in schools so much that I went to work as an interim assistant superintendent for a district, Evergreen in Vancouver, that needed a little bit of support last year. So I came back and I served with them as they transitioned to a new superintendent.
Well, thanks for filling in there. The questions came in. So question 1, Dr. Miner, what does equity look like in a classroom, and what can you do, or will you do, to support staff in reducing the achievement gap in Edmonds?
I'll start with the last part of that question first. What can I do to support staff? Again, I think we can assure that staff have the tools, be that curricular or training or human resources, to support them in their classroom to help achieve those equitable outcomes. Equity in a classroom looks like, as we know from our strategic plan, students feeling a sense of belonging, students feeling like they are supported by their teacher. In many cases, having teachers who look like them, trying to have a workforce which mirrors that of our student population. But also removing barriers. We have systemic barriers in public education systems in many cases. I've been approached multiple times by students saying, you know, we don't have activity buses anymore. That limits who can participate. You know, and I talk to them about the reasons for that. And you have to love talking to students. In one case, one of them said, but none of that is my problem. And I don't disagree with that. Those are adult problems to solve, and that we need to solve those as a system to make sure that our students have that those equitable outcomes. Most importantly, you know, equity isn't performative. It isn't, in the end, anything that we do, but in the end, it is, are our students achieving at the same rates as each other, disregarding demographics, any of those things? Are they having equitable outcomes? Are they all able to read? Are they all achieving math at grade level? Those are the equitable outcomes that we want to have for our students.
Thank you. Dr. Miner, how will you support special education teachers and programs in the Edmonds School District?
Thank you for that question. So I have a heart for that work. One of the things we've undertaken this year, I hope that we've been transparent about this, that many of you have heard about this, is a research study by the American Institute for Research about our special education practices. One of the ways I know that that was the right thing to do is the fact that we had more than 1,300 responses to a survey that we did, and of those, 700 people provided written comments. It tells me that that was the right work to be doing right now. So I think it's really important that we honor that work. We honor the contributions of the focus groups, of everyone who participated in that. Like, I don't have in my head or in my heart right now a plan. Like, I don't have a roadmap until we see the outcome of that. I'm not going to disregard the survey results of 1,300 people and the time and the energy that they've taken to contribute to that. What I will commit to doing is that I believe the next step in that work needs to be shepherded by whoever is in the superintendent's seat. I think that that work needs to be supported and managed by the superintendent, whoever that is. The other thing I would say about that is I think that that needs to be collaborative work, and that needs to include our teachers, our administrators, and our paraeducators as we look at the recommendations that come out of the myriad of contributions that many people have made to that report. As we look at that, we need to include their voices as we make a plan to move forward. Then in the same way that I've tried to be transparent about that research study, I think we need to be transparent about our next steps. We need to be transparent about how we're achieving those, and we need to be transparent about what we are achieving as we're going forward.
Thank you. Dr. Miner, can you share your views on specialist classes like music, library, and physical education? And how will you support professional development for specialists who are often the only specialists in their building?
Yeah, I think that is a really unique challenge, right? When you're an elementary teacher and there's nobody like you. I was the only foreign language teacher in a middle school, of all things, when I was teaching, and so it tended to be that we got on early release days. I don't think we had early release days then, but on professional development days, it was the band teacher, the orchestra teacher, me, and the art teacher, right? And we could certainly talk about pedagogy and how to reach students, but I didn't have very many opportunities to meet with the other Spanish teachers, to learn from each other, to hear what they were doing. I think to continue to have job-alikes in the way that we have, coming up this Friday, is important. I think it's important that you have the chance to listen to each other. I've had a chance to sit in on a couple of our librarian meetings, and they're just wonderful together. And I love to learn from them, and I love to hear them exchanging their ideas and elevating their work together. I think that those experiences are incredibly rich. My first through 8th grade experiences were in a Catholic school, but I can tell you summer was a highlight of my life because that public school down the road opened their library every summer. And that engaged me so deeply in my own learning, in my own growth. I was inspired by foreign language. I am not musical, but I try to get to as many music concerts as I can, and I love seeing that performance-based growth for students. So I think it's absolutely critical. Every person I've talked to in our community when I've been out and about has talked about how important those things are for our students. There's lots of research behind the way music impacts math and library impacts literacy. I think there's a ton of reasons to continue to preserve those and hold those as very important in our system.
Thank you. With recent and frequent lockdowns of our high schools, what are your thoughts on school safety and security?
Yeah, I know that that's definitely been a source of a lot of stress for our students, our families, and those who work in our buildings, right? So one of the things we did this year is to share with the board some work that we've done around safety. Assistant Superintendent Schwab and I have another one of those safety presentations this week. We'll be taping that one in the hope that more people will learn about the things we're doing and that we can gather feedback after we've done these presentations to hear about what other steps people think we need to put into place. I know that school resource officers were removed from our schools some period ago, and that was based on the feedback of our community students, hearing from them, and we continue in our nation to have challenges, right, with police officers and how different people are treated differently by police officers. And I think we should evaluate still, how can we make our, whatever decision we made there, and we're continuing forward with that decision not to have SROs in our school at this time, but how do we make sure that students are feeling safe? I think it's time to do some focus groups with students and with staff to say what types of things would make you feel more safe, what types of things make you feel less safe and welcome, because we have to strike up that balance. It's important, regardless of whether we have school resource officers or not in our schools, that we continue to have good relationships with our law enforcement partners, and that we want to always be cultivating those so they will respond to us and support us when we need it.
Thank you. Can you share with us your vision for early childhood in the Edmonds School District, and in particular, address special education preschoolers and other preschoolers in the community?
Can you repeat the last part?
Yeah. Your vision of early childhood education in the school district, especially the inclusion of special education students.
Thank you. So I've had the chance to visit our early learning centers here in Edmonds and learn a little bit about our programming. I'll start with an area of opportunity that I think is available to our district, and that was one of my superintendent goals this year, to explore transition kindergarten, which is a way for 4-year-olds to be able to access high-quality curriculum and attend kindergarten. A district is able, unless the legislation changes this year, a district is able to set their own standards for who comes to transitional kindergarten and able to support students with that. So I'm still meeting with principals and taking some steps to see whether that is something we could pilot next year, put that into place and pilot a transitional kindergarten program. I think that early learning, if we want all students, as per our strategic plan, to be ready to learn, then we're going to have to support early learning in our district, continue to support it. And in terms of special education students, I think most often, early learning is a very good place to start students with typically developing peers, to get them to have the opportunities to access the same high quality programming that other students may have. When in a previous district I worked in, we developed 100% inclusion early learning, and we built our inclusion programs forward from there rather than doing it at other places. So most of the children then went into early learning kindergartners with typically developing peers and continued on having access to grade level curriculum. Not without support. That doesn't happen magically. That doesn't happen by just saying, well, we're going to do it and thus it is so. We have to have the right supports in place for the classrooms, the teachers, the paraeducators, and the students to be able to do that successfully. But it does have better educational outcomes when you can do that.
Thank you. What plans might you have to increase student input and develop student leadership in Edmonds?
Well, I do have a student advisory board to the superintendent, and I enjoy working with them. And I ask that very question of them, because how better to learn about that than asking them? Because I can tell you they're not following my Twitter and they're not getting emails. Or they're getting emails, maybe not right now, but they are not always attentive to their emails. So I've asked them about how can we reach you where you are. Some of it, I don't know if I'm going to be able to adapt to Discord. That moment in my life may have passed. But we need to meet the students where they are using the platforms that they're using in order to elevate their voices. We need to hear from them. We need to make sure that we're including them, and we need to allow for full participation with them. I'm really thrilled that this board has had a really robust student advisor to the board program. 2 of those students will be accompanying us to Olympia as we're working on our legislative platforms and sharing those with legislators. So I'm thrilled that that's been a part of what we do, but I want to continue to do that with our students if I have the opportunity.
Thank you. Many school districts around the state and the country have revised in Washington, we call them highly capable education programs and policies, to move away from magnet programs toward more inclusive research-based models. How might you approach the issues around highly capable programs here in Edmonds?
So it's an incredibly, I mean, it is a very similar challenge to inclusive programs, but it isn't really different in many ways. To truly differentiate in a classroom, educators need support, they need training, they need materials. That can't happen without those things. Again, in a previous district, we developed, we did those things. We supported teachers with materials, we supported teachers with training, we supported them with really what they asked for. They told us what they needed, and we supported them with that. We were so successful differentiating that we ended up closing one of our magnet programs because families felt like they got what they needed at their home school without having to have their children attend a magnet program, perhaps splitting up their family one with the other. They still had one magnet program when I left in Shoreline, but one of them, because the numbers had diminished so much, had closed. The other thing we were able to do was to begin, and it takes a long time to do this, but begin to change the demographics of our highly capable programs. Giftedness is distributed equally among all races, and our programs in Shoreline did not reflect that giftedness. We were disproportionate in white and Asian students, which begs the question, how were we identifying students? How were we removing barriers to that identification? And we were able to make significant progress in that realm as well. I think at the heart of that has to be what's best for students. It's embedded in the question, what does the research tell us? How can we support that? And keeping our 3 E's of equity, engagement, and excellence deeply in mind on that question.
Thank you. There are several questions here dealing with professional development of teachers, paraeducators, supporting teachers. I'm going to try to wrap them into one mega question. So ask me to repeat it if you need to. But how will you work to ensure high quality support staff and teachers are hired, trained, and retained? And let's combine that with what kind of ongoing professional development will the district provide under your leadership for all members of the teaching and learning staff?
I think I got most of it, but can you repeat it for me?
Probably not, but I'll give it a shot here. How do you ensure high quality support for staff, teachers, and paraeducators through hiring and retaining and professional development, particularly around new initiatives and new teaching models? I threw that in.
Thank you. So as I'm reading the question, how do we make sure that we have high quality support for staff, teachers, making sure they're hired, provided ongoing professional development, and retention is a huge issue as well. So I think that educator voice plays a huge role in that. How do I know what our educators, what our paraeducators need and are feeling if we're not asking them about that? We know that we have areas to grow. We know that we need to improve our reading. We know, but I think all our teachers and our paraeducators know that too. There's no question in my mind that you don't also know that, but that you also know what's happening in your classrooms and how we can support you. I think it may be a question of differentiation, not one size fits all. We have experienced teachers who may need a refresher on one aspect of this, or may have been on a leave the year we adopted a curriculum and never really come up to speed with it. And we have beginning teachers who may be, I certainly was when I was a beginning teacher, grappling with just the day-to-day management, classroom management of my students, whereas another teacher may have a whole bunch of tools in their tool belt on that, right? So we need to differentiate for them. I think retention is a huge issue, and retention comes around. We don't want to be rehiring, the same positions year in and year out. We can hire 5 SLPs, and if we lose 5 SLPs, we're back to where we started from, right? So we need to figure out what, that may involve doing exit interviews, learning from people, understanding how they feel about being in Edmonds, what they feel about their role here. Are they getting the respect they need? Are they getting the professional development they need? I think that speaks also to our ongoing partnerships with our union partners, having good relationships with them to make sure they're hearing from their employees and the people they work with. We want to make sure that we're listening to them as well. And I think new initiatives, that's always a hard one. One of the things I think we always fall short on is fortunately, every year people get to retire. Some people, and we don't retrain on initiatives. If you don't come in the year that the math is adopted, how do you ever get the math adoption? And I've been in districts where I've thought, oh boy, now have 3 years of new teachers who didn't ever get the professional development for the math adoption. You have quite a bit of mission drift at that point, right? So we need to make sure as a teaching and learning team and all of the supervisors who support them that we are making sure that we're providing the things that people need to be successful.
Thank you. What are one or two strengths that you've noticed or you've discovered in the Edmonds School District? And Mike, is there an area that you think could improve?
Well, I think if we look around tonight, that's one of the strengths of the Edmonds School District. I think people in this community are proud of this community, they stand up for this community, and they want what's best for our community's children. That is a strength, and we may not always be exactly cohesive as we're moving toward that, but I don't meet anyone in this district who isn't all about those things. I think a challenge or something we can do to improve. I think that, so I'm going to pause here and say, once somebody told me that interview as yourself because you can't ever be anybody else for very long. So I'm going to go ahead and be a little bit vulnerable here and really share something. I do see sometimes that there are trust challenges or lack of communication we have to learn more about what those things stem from. But there are times when messaging, when trust, when positive intent, some of those things are not always there. And I think that there may be some repair work to be done. And COVID was hard. And I think some of it stems from that, and some of it may go back further than that. But I think that that's an area for growth. We all need to be working together to rebuild that community and to be one so that we can be the best we can be moving forward. I heard the mayor say recently, the mayor of Edmonds, I went to his State of the Union, and I thought, I wish I had thought about that and said it first, but I'll just quote him. He said, our best days are ahead of us, and I think if we work on those issues in Edmonds, truly our best days can be ahead of us.
That's a good lead into this next question, and that is, how might you address the fact that classrooms look and feel and function differently now than in the post-pandemic world? Behavior challenges, gaps in learning, teacher and student burnout, etc.
Well, one of the things I think we need to do is get over this idea that we're behind. We are where we are, and we need to meet our students where they are, and we need to move forward from there. If we're operating from a deficit model, like, we're behind, we need to catch up, that's always going to be incredible stress. I'm not saying that we don't need to have rigorous expectations. I'm not saying that we don't want to intersect with grade level expectations. So don't get me wrong there. I think those are the standards we hold ourselves to, but we do that through an asset-based model. What are our children bringing to the table? What are our families bringing to the table? And what can our district do to support those folks in the classroom, which is the greatest unit of change in any district? Behavior is a challenge, right? And our students are coming to us. A long time ago, I learned that behavior is communication, and I still believe that. So what are our students communicating to us? How are they communicating to us about their needs, and how can we support that? I don't believe that can always be the classroom teacher. I don't believe that can always be the building administrator. I think that we all have to work together on that, keeping in mind our parents as partners, community-based organizations who can support us. It's truly going to take an entire village, to use that cliche, to support our students and our system as we work out of the pandemic challenges. And the last part of that question, I'm sorry?
I lost it too, I'm sorry. But I have a cheat sheet here. So gaps, behavior challenges, gaps in learning, student and teacher burnout.
Oh, student and teacher burnout, right? I think that teacher burnout, we're still seeing across the nation challenges with people facing these really hard days in their classrooms. And I think that we have to continue to support through our employee assistant program, through listening, through trying to figure out what we can do as a system. There aren't any easy answers to that because classrooms are going to be challenging for a while. But what can we do to listen to each other and see what we can do to mitigate those challenges and find solutions to move us forward?
What systems have you put in place or do you think can be put in place to support multilingual learners?
So in my previous district, so if we're asking specifically about multilingual, when I first arrived at a district, we had what I will loosely call magnet programs. We moved children out of their neighborhood schools into two or three schools in the district where we served MLL learners. Well, the challenge with that is they're already facing issues with belonging, they're already facing issues in their neighborhoods, and then we're now busing them across town to attend a different kind of a program. And so we changed our model, we distributed the staffing, and we served children in their neighborhood schools. That allowed us to take our next step to create a dual language program because we reached this critical mass of students who spoke a target language in that school, and we created a dual language program there which benefited both English learners and our multilingual learners. So that was something we did. We put that back into neighborhood schools with supports, of course, and distribution of the resources that had previously gone with those programs rather than having self-contained programs.
So Dr. Miner, what strategies do you use as a district leader for diagnosing where a district is performing in terms of student achievement and working on plans for improvement?
So, this comes really down to that deep data question. And we have all sorts of data. School districts can be data rich and information poor. And I have certainly been guilty of that during my career. We have lots of both formative and summative assessments. We have to be careful to understand the difference and to not conflate them and to not base our programming on the wrong types of data. I think we can look at attendance data. We do have perception data here about how our students feel about being at school. That's something that we can look at. We have iReady data. We have obviously SBA data. We can look at all of that. We can disaggregate, but I think a lot of the important work of that happens at schools by training our administrators to support them as you look at it at the schools. Because granular, it's more important to look at an individual school, what's going well there, what might be some challenges. But then we also have to look at district trends. If we know that we are not doing well with number sense, I don't think it's because everybody out there is not trying to teach number sense. It's probably you don't have the right tools, and we can support with that.
Talk about your vision for supporting paraeducators and other support staff in the district. I know you've touched on some of this already.
Well, and we know there's a significant shortage of paraeducators, and we know that, and when I say we, that's not limited to Edmonds, but again, to quote the student who said, it's not my problem, that's not anybody in the classrooms here's problem, right? We have to figure out how we're going to fix that in Edmonds. How are we going to get highly qualified, trained paraeducators into our building, and then most importantly, well, not most importantly, but equally importantly, how are we going to retain them? How are we going to make Edmonds a place where they want to continue to work, where they feel safe and secure and supported in their job each and every day? I know that they've had some real challenges, and then those things get exacerbated by shortages. So all of a sudden you're a substitute in a classroom, and you're one of 2, and there were supposed to be 6. I don't think you're going to come back to that classroom the next day. I hope you'll come back to Edmonds, but you may not. So we have to think about our recruitment strategies. We have to think about, one of the things we've talked about we haven't implemented yet at the district is, maybe we just have Friday interview days, and we've got a team ready, and anybody who's got their application ready to go, we interview on Fridays with a team of people so that there's no lag. You're not waiting for 3 weeks, because there are a lot of jobs out there, and you can find something if we're waiting too long. But then the other thing is we have to think about, do we put you into a classroom right away? We know there's an intensive need, or do we slow down, to go far? Do we give you 4 or 5 days of training so that you feel better prepared, you're more likely to be successful, and you're more likely to return?
Thank you. So one parent in the audience wrote a question and noted that since her child's been in the Edmonds School District, the next superintendent will be the 5th that has led the district in the time that her child's been here. So they just want to know what short-term goal you might have for the district and maybe even a long-term goal.
At one point in my career, I was I think I was the 5th superintendent in 6 years in that small district I talked about. And at one point I said to my board president, this was in the early 2000s, I said, you realize I'm bringing up the average this century, right? Because I stayed there long enough to see a difference. A short-term goal, I think the work of that AIR project and some special ed, I just think there's so much opportunity there, and I'm excited about it. I think that situation is just ripe and I think that would be like a first-year goal. A long-term goal, I would love to stay if selected, in this district long enough to see the kind of gains that I saw in the last district I stayed in for 7 years. We moved graduation rates from 85 to 90%. Doesn't sound like much, but when you get up into those numbers, it's hard to move. It can be hard to move the needle. We moved more than 20 points for graduation rates for some subgroups. And I could go, including nearly 20 for both special ed and our Latinx students. Obviously, there's downstream successes. That's just the final marker, right? When we move from in the 50s for special education students graduating to in the 70s, lots of things happened before that were successes. I would love to stay in whichever district I'm serving next long enough to see those kinds of impacts and those kind of gains in a system, because for me, ultimately, it's all about student achievement. I don't think student achievement can happen without a successful staff, without supported staff members, without people who love working here and working for those students each and every day.
Thank you. And I'm going to call this our last question, and it's about students. It's how you ended your last answer with, and it's how will you center student voices and needs?
Well, I talked a little bit about those student voices earlier. I also think that our teachers and our paraeducators can be conduits for those student voices and those student needs. How would I center them? I think we need to center our strategic plan. We have a strategic plan that's really written about students. We need to center those goals we have about sense of belonging and our work with students, as well as those academic markers. Someone said to me once, I was a little bit stuck with, let's gather feedback about what people want for their kids. Let's gather feedback about what we should do for students. And somebody said, you don't waste any time on that. Teach them to read, teach them to write, and give them every opportunity that every single student in the district has. And I thought those are wise words. Of course, we want them to have a sense of belonging, but reading at grade level gives you a sense of belonging. We want you to have a sense that I'm a math scholar. We want you to believe in the reality of your dreams and the things that you can do. And that is how I believe we need to center the students and their voice, by fighting each and every day for their achievement, by fighting for the staff who support them and those who teach them.
Thank you. I said that was the last question, so I'm going to break my own rule because this question came in, and this was a topic that we heard, my associates and I heard a lot when we were conducting focus groups around the district, so I'm going to ask it. I can do that because I'm the moderator. What is your specific plan to recruit and retain and support teachers of color in the Edmonds School District?
Well, I love that we have a program in place, which is our Educators of Color Foundation. I think, so I really think my theme here has become like, this isn't anybody's problem. We just have to fix this, right? There is a pipeline problem in the state of Washington. Our universities are not producing teachers of color who match the demographics of the students in this state or the students in the Edmonds School District. So really, other superintendents and I have jokingly said, we're gonna start signing like 12-year-olds. If you become a teacher, here's a contract for 14 years from now so that you can come work in the Edmonds School District. So some things like being more aggressive to attract teachers. There are some gains to be made by that, but some other district is going to be more aggressive and take one of our teachers from us, right? I think grow your own programs are a great way to diversify your workforce. I think it gives us the opportunity to look at people and support people who may not otherwise have the opportunity to become a teacher. I do think that we need to tell our Edmonds story. I can tell you, when I came to Edmonds, there are a lot of people out there who think that Edmonds School District is a rich white district. And that is not the case. And they need to understand that we have a rich and powerful diversity celebrating the brilliance of our students and our families, and that this is a wonderful place to work if that's something you value. So I think that that is something we need to do. We need to tell our story and get that messaging out. And I think that we need to be a place where people want to work, ultimately. We need to strive to be a highly desirable district that is number one on people's lists when they're thinking about, I'm going to be out there applying for districts, where do I want to go? I want to go to Edmonds. And that we have the opportunity to select from the very top tier teachers in the state.
Thank you very much. I won't pull a change on you now. That is the last question. Folks, let's give Dr. Miner a round of applause. That was a lot of work. Thank you. And I have to commend you all who wrote a question. Wow, it kept pouring in. There's a lot more questions than I anticipated. It was a task to try to categorize those. I know that many of you feel like, well, he didn't ask my question. I tried to get all the themes that were identified and address those. But anyway, take this time to fill out those impression sheets relative to Dr. Miner. At the top of those impression sheets, we have the criteria that were identified through our work with focus groups and individuals asking questions about what do you want to see in your next superintendent. Those criteria are what we were looking for, what you want to really respond to in terms of what you heard tonight from Dr. Miner and what you'll hear from Dr. Pedrosa. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start a little early. So, one of the things I neglected to go over when I went over how this is all going to work is the fact that I'm going to try to ask basically the same questions of each candidate for comparison purposes. There may be some differences, but I'm going to try to stick to mostly the same questions. So you don't need to fill out the cards and get them to somebody. So there you go. So I'm just very pleased to introduce the next candidate, Dr. Consi Pedrosa, who has served as Associate Superintendent most recently in the Seattle School District, where she's been an administrator for over 10 years. She also worked and taught in the Everett School District, and she received her doctorate from the University of Washington. So let's welcome Dr. Pedrosa.
Good evening. I know it's just incredible that you're here on a late night. Thank you so much for having me here. I am Dr. Consi Pedrosa. I am the Associate Superintendent of Seattle Public Schools and now a candidate for Superintendent of Edmonds School District. Currently, I have the responsibility for the education of 49,000 students in our district and 106 schools. I have the academic and operational and budgetary oversight and management for the schools and improvement divisions, student services divisions, which includes special education, advanced learning, and multilingual education, as well as the curriculum, instruction, and assessment divisions. So basically everything that wraps around a school environment. I'm a Washington native. I graduated north. It's from Stanwood. I've been around here, and I've I always think about the two values that my mother always taught me growing up, that the love of your community is what's the most powerful thing, and nobody can take your education away from you. So those are the two values I have that I think about all the time when I think about my work and how I support students in the classroom. I just want to share a little bit about why I'm here and why I'm interested in being here. I started off as both my parents were bilingual, and they actually met at the Skagit Valley. Picking strawberries of all things, and that instilled a love of me for getting an education. I was the first one in my family to get a diploma, and I'm the first one in my family to go to college. And for me, ever since having done that, that has been something that I just really feel powerful, the power of education to support all of the students and to get them to where they want to be in life. I've received my master's and doctorate, as he said, from the University of Washington, and it's been over 25 years in education. I've been a teacher, I've been a principal leadership coach, the director for leadership development for equity, and the chief of student support services. And I believe each role has gifted me with the knowledge and skills and invaluable experience that I see in direct alignment to your vision for equity, engagement, and excellence for every student in Edmonds School District. I have 3 values of my own around that work. One is high quality instruction in high quality schools, diversity, inclusion, and equity for every student so they are seen as a whole person in the classrooms, in the schools, in the buildings, and lastly, student-centered decision-making. Those are my core values when I think about the work that we need to do. And then the big question, why Edmonds? Why Edmonds? So I've actually have been part of your community, Edmonds School District, all over for many, many years. I have family who lives here, so I've celebrated here. I've done some of my mom who lives here as well. I'm in the grocery store, taking her to the grocery store. I've been here, and I know that the people here are the heart of the community. And because of that, I know that you center students in everything you do. You center engagement, you center community, and that's why Edmonds School District. I've looked at your strategic plan, and everything that you believe in is aligned to my vision and my values. So that's why Edmonds, and I'm super excited to be here and share more. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pedrosa. First question, what does equity look like in a classroom, and what will you do to support reducing the achievement gap in Edmonds?
Yeah, so equity looks it's a very challenging concept in the classroom, but what it means is that every student is able to reach their maximum potential in the classroom. That means that we have accessible curriculum, so that curriculum that actually not only meets the needs of all the unique learners in the classroom, so for the multilingual learner, the special education learner, even the advanced learner. So making sure that they have adequate resources, materials, and supports, and that teachers actually have the professional development to support those students and be able to differentiate in the classroom. It means that we provide assessments so that teachers and parents can look at the data and make growth goals with the students, and the students can make growth goals. And it also requires that we are really thinking about elevating every student to maximum learning. So in what we did in our district, we actually made a goal because we realized that our students who were multilingual learners and our students who had IEPs were not actually graduating at the rate that we wanted them to graduate on par with other students. So that was a strategic goal that we made, and we partnered with the Curriculum and Instruction Department, the Special Ed Department, and the directors of schools in the high school to make these goals. We were just in the paper recently because if you look at what we've done is since even prior to the pandemic, every goal area, if you look for students who reached and attained and graduated on time, as well as taking an advanced coursework, every area increased. All students, students of color, multilingual students, students with IEPs, everyone advanced. And that's what that means when you close the achievement gap, is that you're looking at all the students, but you're also targeting goals so that everyone can be successful in the classroom. That's what it should look like, that everyone in the classroom is exceeding to the highest level. And so for here, that is the work that I believe that we could do for all of the students in the system.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
With the recent news and frequent lockdowns and tragic news related to school safety, particularly in high schools.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around school safety and security?
Yeah. I think it's very challenging. We recently had an incident ourselves in our system. One of the most important things that I'm a parent, I'm a mom of a senior, and I drop him off to school every morning, and I think about that every day when I drop him off and when I pick him up, because I want to make sure that he's safe in school. I know that's what the parents are thinking about, and it's a national tragedy that's happening all over the United States. One of the pieces that I think that we do is that we have to work with community. We have to figure out what do we need to do to improve safety in our schools? What does that look like? What does that mean in terms of access? What does that mean for creating safety, and not just safety in the sense of the physical safety, the violent safety, but just making sure that we also have a response to support students who might be actually suffering, right? What are we doing to support students? Because many times when students are doing activities that they should not be doing, it's due to other reasons, such as mental health or things like that. So we have to look at safety from a multi-pronged approach. There has to be adequate wellness supports for schools. There has to be a responsive plan like a critical response plan to ensure that the school is supported if there's any critical incidences, if there's students that are expressing any concerns about their mental health. And then finally, we need to make sure that we have adequate safety and security throughout our systems. And we have solid partnerships with our police department. And what does that look like? That looks different in every community. We recently have been meeting monthly with our police department just to make sure that we're on the same page, that we are aligned, that we have understanding of what their role is when they come into schools, what's our role, right, and working together. And so coming to some common understandings of what that looks like. What does that look like for the school? What does that look like outside of school? It's work that's ongoing, and it has to keep going. Since our last incident, we've been continually debriefing that, looking at where could we improve, what did we do well, and then where do we continue to make sure that all of our schools have a plan. But you need a plan, and you need to be constantly reviewing that plan and meeting with all stakeholders, because it is very challenging, and it's a real thing, and we want to make sure that we actually are the best prepared in the system, because sometimes we can't stop an incident, but we can really be responsive, and we can be responsive in a quick way to ensure that nobody else gets hurt, right? That's what we can control, is how responsive we are. And so that's the work that I would be working towards, is how quickly we are responsively to those situations.
Thank you. So Dr. Pedrosa, talk to us about your vision of preschool, and include students who qualify for special education services in preschool.
I actually think that preschool is there's so much evidence and research that really talks about what a robust preschool program can do for the trajectory of a student and their learning. And I also believe that preschool is actually the best place to really build out inclusionary practices in those classrooms, to really have a meaningful experience with students in a guided way with curriculum and the whole child. I just believe that there's so much opportunity with preschool programs so that we can ensure that they are really getting into kindergarten with fully kindergarten ready. And so how that works is that we have to have programs that actually work together. We have to have special education, curriculum instruction, all of those components working together, and really build out what that looks like in the classroom. But I'm a firm believer that preschool is a vital component. We shouldn't be saying K-12, it's actually pre-K-12 should be what we should be talking about when we're talking about our students and our grade level pathways.
Thank you. What will you do to support queer, LGBTQ plus students and staff?
So if we have any student in our community that is not feeling supported or safe, then we haven't done our job. So I believe that whenever we build a school system and whenever we're building curriculum and wellness curriculum, it's important that every student be seen and supported. So one of the things that should happen is that we actually have staff that are trained and understand how to support students, especially if they're needing counseling support or if they just want something's happening to them. There should be no tolerance for bullying of anybody for any reason. And so it's really up to us to figure out how to create that safety for every student. And so it does mean that people need help, right? People need help and support and how to support students, and sometimes there's training, and we have now some rules and regulations on how to do that. There's curriculum to support that, but we have to do it with the community, and we have to do it with intention. And I will say, in agreement, we need to listen to the students first. The students need to tell us what it is that they're needing support from. The staff need to tell us as well. We need to sit down and talk with them. They need to share with us what's been happening. They need to share with us why they feel that this is the support they need, and then we as a system need to act to support them, to make sure that we're actually doing and meeting their needs, and not what I assume might be their needs. And so that's the work that we have to do together.
Thank you. In your experience as an administrator, talk about what you've done to support special education departments, including families, students,
Yeah.
and professional development for teachers and staff.
So we have been so special education so I'm a special education mom, right? I have 2 children with IEPs, and one has dyslexia, one has autism. And so I've actually been through a system from the time they were little until they're now, my youngest is 18, and we're looking at his pathways after graduation this year. And I'm just gonna speak from the heart. It's super challenging, even for myself as somebody who's in the system, sometimes to navigate the system. I just know I've had many challenges myself. I've also had really great experiences too. And so one of the things that I believe, and it's what we said before, is really making sure we're listening to families and the students about what is happening for them in special education and what is not happening for them in special education. So one of the things that we did as a system is we actually launched 20, that was right when we were starting to come back in person, but 20 special education community forums over the course of a year. We started in the summer, so actually 12 months. And we targeted also bilingual families and various families in the different regions because we wanted to hear about their experiences. We wanted to hear their reality with especially doing remote learning, and we wanted to hear from what was actually the challenges that they were facing and what they were really worried about. Through that work, we actually then learned from that experience, and we worked with we now have a special education task force group that comprises of families. We have 5 parent reps on there, our union partners, and our district staff. And so we have 2 years of task force work where we're actually working through all the learning that we have that we're now building into practice in our system. That's what happens when you work together, but you first have to listen to the impacted community first to determine, so what do you do with that information, and how do you really do something different in your department or your division so that the outcomes for students actually is what you're trying to achieve, and it actually has the impact that you wanted it to have. So that's work that's still ongoing. We've received some national attention for that. We're actually gonna share a little bit of that at a conference coming up really soon, and but the work still continues because we're not there yet. We did receive commendations from OSPI regarding our work, and so that's work we're continuing to do, and we're continuing to learn from our families, because as we get back to more in person, there's still more learning to do, right? So just really believe that you have to take the information from the people that are being impacted to enact change, and then it has to be systemic change, because we want it for the long term, not the short term.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Please share with us your views on specialists, particularly in the elementary, music, library,
Yeah.
physical education, and how will you support their professional development when they may be the only music teacher in the building?
Yes, I've heard, yes. I was an elementary principal too for years, so That is a challenge. It was even I was a small school, high school principal. That was still a challenge back in the day. And I think so we can't rely on just having them have their own PD, professional learning, just in that space. We need to figure out how to build out their networks, how to build out networks of for example, a PE network between the district. How do we build out an art network throughout the district? How do we build out, even for like our nurses, how do we have our nurses have nursing time among the district? And how do we release time to do that? So we have to get creative. We have to get creative with our union partners. We can learn from what other districts are doing, but there is a place for that. There is a place to provide that learning in a collective way throughout the system. And so we just have to think about how to be creative with that and learn from other districts and see what we can agree to in this system.
Thank you. Many districts around the state and around the country, including Seattle, have revised their highly capable program policies and practices to move away from magnet programs to a more inclusive research-based model. How would you approach the issues around highly capable programs here in Edmonds?
Yeah, so just to share that in Seattle, it actually started from a grassroots effort of a task force. They spent 18 months as a community. It was mostly parents, majority of parents, and then some district staff, going through research and understanding. So for that context, taking those 18 months and their recommendations, which by the way are all online, so their task force recommendations are online, became the mission for the school board, that they felt that we needed to start enacting some of those procedures and those changes. So that's where that root came from. And the only changes that I believe that would be necessary is if there is, there's a need. And so if there is a need and there's interest in looking at that and doing that research, happy to support that in a collective way, happy to support a group of advisory or a task force group to explore it, but it has to come from community, and it has to come from the board. The board is the visionary of the group, and if they feel that everything's working well, then that's not something that we would do. But if it's something that community really feels that we need to change, then of course we need to do that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make improvements, right? So we can still make improvements on how we identify students, because as we know, there are disparities in that. We can look at opportunities, how to expand opportunities, and you don't need a policy change to do that. So anything that doesn't require a policy change, but that we could still do to improve access and opportunity for students, we should still consider looking at doing.
Thank you. In your past work and in your future work, what have you done and will you do to increase student input and to develop student leadership?
Yeah. So student leadership and student input, excuse me, I have a bad cold, by the way, so I'm here with a stuffy head, so thank you for being gracious with me today. But student voice has been something that I have believed is essential for doing any changes in our system. Students experience schools. So I know that for me, so I'm going to date myself, when I graduated in 1982 from high school, right? That experience is so different from what my own children are going through. It is vastly different. And the things that they have to deal with, we can't even predict what the future of education is going to be, especially with all of the things with the internet and social media and all of those other components. We don't even know the challenges. We now have research that shows that how social media is affecting our students, how the friendships are affecting them. So I think it's really important that we actually think about our vision for the work around students and supporting their learning. So that means, how do we explore innovation, STEM? How do we envision and support digital learning really robustly? Because I'm sure many of you are working in industries that have probably changed in the last 10 years. And so how do we get our students ready for that type of innovative work with thinking about how we provide the quality education that we want to provide them?
Talk about how you would go about diagnosing where a district is, where schools are around student achievement, and that leads to plans for improvement.
So the first thing that we do, and I think it's pretty typical, but just like any analysis, you need to have data, but you need to have you have to have data that's actually the numbers, the assessments, but also the students. Are there surveys? What are the students saying in the classrooms? The grades, how are the kids performing in the classrooms? There's a lot that you can do to look at, not just map tests, not just SBAC, but other things that you can do to look at to get a robust, we call it a profile of a learner and a profile of a graduate. So what does that all mean when we put that together and thinking about the work? And then we look at the school improvement plan, and if there are students that are not, if they have a goal, right, if they have a goal for achievement for one group or one grade level, but that the students aren't meeting that goal, then we have to sort of work, we have to begin to work with the school leaders, and we have to work with the teams to really start understanding what are the strategies and what are the action plans that you actually have in place. What are the supports that are here for students? It's about the core instruction. It's about what's happening in the classroom every day. We can talk about interventions, we can talk about everything else, but actually it's core instruction and the teaching and the quality of the teaching that's happening every day. But you do the analysis by looking at a bunch of things together, making sure they're aligned to the goals, and then you put in your action steps to address every one of those things to support success for students. That's how we continue to push ourselves as a system, because if we really say that we mean all kids and every student, then that means all kids and every student, and so we have to do that work together.
Thank you. Dr. Pedrosa, in your opening, you talked about your connections with Edmonds.
Yeah.
And I imagine that you've done a little research on the district.
Yeah.
What would you say from your look thus far are the strengths of Edmonds?
Yeah.
And are there some areas that you would wonder about in terms of improvement?
So I believe that you have a really strong focus on academic success. You have really strong instructional practices. Everybody that I've met has talked about teachers and educators and students in really positive, meaningful ways. And I think that comes across in even the work that you're trying to achieve with your strategic plan, really getting at what do the students need to learn in order to be successful in life. So those are strengths that I see. I also see a commitment to equity. I see a commitment to community-centered engagement. And I definitely see the fact that people really do want to preserve the relationships that you have in your community and the work that you're doing. Some of the challenges that I've heard about, at least through all my visits and some of the talkings I've had today, of course there's still concerns about safety and security. I heard that. I've heard a little bit about special education. And I've heard a little bit about some other areas that they're looking not multilingual, but not just not multilingual, but I've heard about some of the dual language expansion work. And so those are 3 areas that I have heard about and I am interested in exploring. But the thing that I believe is you have such a strong foundation in your relationships and the work that you are doing that you'll get through all of those pieces together.
Thank you. In your past work, what kind of systems did you help support or put in place to support multilingual learners?
Yes. So that's been one of the pieces that we've been talking about a lot, especially around the newcomer students that have been coming in recently, because the newcomers have been coming in, and it's been a challenge because they've been coming in through more of our general education classrooms. But I believe one of the things we're doing right now is we're actually bringing in universal design for learning as our framework for how we support students with IEPs and students with multilingual students. That is something that we're building out with our whole district. We are teaching and learning with our school leaders, and we have identified pilot schools, the schools that feel that they're ready to take this on, and we're using that as a strategy to make sure that our students get and design instruction that supports their needs specifically in the classroom and during the day. So that is the work that we're launching. It's a long series of professional development we're doing, but if we are saying that inclusion matters, it means that it matters in the instruction, it means it matters in the delivery, it matters in the resources, and it matters in the curriculum. So that is where we're putting our efforts specifically for multilingual students.
Thank you. How will you address the fact that our classrooms look, feel, and function very differently right now in the post-pandemic world, with behavior challenges, gaps in learning, teacher and student burnout, etc.
Well, I believe that wellness is critical not just for students, but for staff. So that would be something to look at and see what are the resources there to support staff. When we think about behaviors, what are the behavioral supports and behavioral services that can support and wrap around school teams as we're dealing with challenging behaviors? We're experiencing some of the same dynamics in our system. So we'd have to take a look at what's actually happening and then be honest, let's look at what's not happening. Is there responsiveness? Are we being responsive in a timely way to support the teachers and the students and the principals in the classroom? Is there training? Are there tools that people are needing? One of the things that we've been launching is de-escalation training system-wide within our schools. So de-escalation training is one answer, but it's not all of the answers. You still need staff and supports to support students. And so I just wonder if you were going to be looking into that, how would we support the professional learning, the coaching, and the system to make sure that everyone has what they need to support students, especially during these challenging times in the classroom. The classroom looks different, right? We still have to, if a classroom has a lot of illness, kids are staying home. It's just different. You can't go to school in the way we used to before. But I think that when we take care of our people, when we listen to our people, right, and we try to think through what are the systems and supports that are needed, then we can actually get through it together. It's not going to be easy. But I believe that if we continue to ask the questions, talk to folks, see what's actually happening in the day-to-day, and then reframe and restructure the supports that we are giving to schools, then I think that we will come out better at the end.
Thank you. What specific plans might you implement to recruit, retain, and support teachers of color in the district?
So that is a strategy. There's a lot of evidence to support bringing more diversity into the classrooms and students of color. There's research that shows that when one student has one teacher that looks like them, then their trajectory for success actually increases. And the more teachers, the more trajectory to success. So there is research behind that. And one of the strategies we've done, and I believe that we could do, is looking at the hiring, right? What the hiring practices. Thinking about how we're recruiting, how we're retaining, but additionally, what are things that we can do? Because if we acknowledge that everyone has bias, right? Bias in decision making and bias in just our everyone, if we acknowledge that everyone has it, then how do we build tools during the hiring process to address bias, especially in hiring? Because there's a lot of bias in hiring. There's a lot of articles and research behind that. And then additionally, what is needed in terms of maybe retooling some of the interview questions, making sure that everyone really gets a chance to answer authentically their answers in a way that, so it's not a gotcha. We're actually trying to get information from people. So there's actually successful tools that are out there. There's a lot of research around this topic, and I think it's just looking at the current practices we have and not necessarily changing everything, but maybe embedding some of these tools and resources into the current practices you have, and then really thinking about our retention tools so that we can keep the community that we do have still wanting to work in Edmonds.
Okay, thank you. Last question.
Okay.
How will you center student voices and needs if you're hired as their next superintendent here in Edmonds?
Well, I know that the students, I actually think that the best part of my day is when I get to spend with students. Every time I get to go to a school, I was a high school principal, so I always feel like when I get to go to the high school or the elementary school, just spending time with the students, they say the best things to you, and they're really honest with how they're feeling and what they're doing. We held a community, so we have to meet with students. I've done it in many of my roles. When we had a racial incident at one of our schools, I actually met with the students from a high school who wanted to talk to us about that. And we talked about their concerns, and we talked about ways that we can get change. We've actually included students in our task force and advisory groups, not just one, but many, because when you have only one student there, it's very challenging for them because they feel singled out. They feel that, you know, the people are always referring to them and saying, hey, what do you think? And the student needs more people there so that they can really have a balanced voice and different perspectives, because students from all the different high schools might have different perspectives. So making sure they're included in that work. But also what we've done additionally, because we learned that leadership is a big component of that. So we used to have a student advisory group to the superintendent. And one of the things that we learned is the students shared with us is they wanted, before they met with the superintendent, they wanted to spend some time building their skills. And so we actually hired an outside facilitator to work with the students so that they could actually build their leadership skills, because not all the students have the ability to ask those questions in a way, or really, even if you think about positionality. And so we brought in an outside facilitator to train the student advisory group, and then they worked very closely with us and the small cabinet and the superintendent on some of the issues and concerns that they had. We met regularly, we met monthly, and we talked, and they would say, we want to learn about this. So we would bring folks in from other departments. So we would bring in the special ed department, or we'd bring in the ethnic studies department, or some other department, so they could really learn and give feedback to us. One thing we did that was really interesting, and so the student group actually had a bunch of recommendations they wanted to give to their principals. So we allowed them to come to the principal training, and they shared all of their advice to their principals from the student perspective. The principals, they actually stood up and applauded them, and were really happy that they were brave in sharing these things, and the students felt very validated, right, that they were heard. So there's just many, many ways you can do student voice. When I was director of equity, we actually co-ran with a student group. We had a student-run forum that I co-ran with them because they had a lot to say about what equity meant to them. So it means that we bring the students in, right? We bring them in. They actually are part of decision-making. They're part of conversations. And we actually authentically listen to them when they tell us something's not going well. And then we have to, why? We've got to address it. And so that's an example. Those are examples of how we can use student voice in meaningful ways to really think through what our vision for the district.
Thank you very much. Let's show our appreciation for Dr. Pedrosa, please. It's been a long day. But you aren't done. You have some work to do now, so please fill out that impression form. I want to say that I know I didn't answer all the questions that were submitted, and you may be one who's thinking, he didn't ask my question. What I tried to do is make it comparable between the candidates and ask roughly the same questions so that you could compare. There was one question that I was particularly intrigued by. It's what is your favorite kitchen utensil? I didn't ask that one, but I might give it to the board because the board will be interviewing the candidates tomorrow. They might want to slip that one in. So please fill out your impression sheets. Turn them in at the table on the way out. I'll hang out here for a while if you have a question about the process. The board will interview tomorrow. The candidates will visit schools, and the board could make a decision as early as tomorrow or Thursday morning. So thank you very much.